Well, welcome again to Finding Freedom. We're at our third part of this boundaries series. And what we've seen so far is that we have boundaries that are both internal rules that we make for ourselves to keep us safe and to keep us healthy. We have external boundaries that affect how much I let people into my life, how I expect them to treat me in a respectful, loving way. So all of those are what boundaries are about, safety and protection. I just want to give you a third purpose for boundaries, and it has to do with recognizing our own limitations as a human being, and that those limitations will affect how we make relationships. So I love the illustration of a Lego block. And a Lego block, you can see there the 6 different posts. So what I have to face as a human being is that I have limited time and I have limited energy. So that means that I can't be close friends with everybody that I meet. So one of the reasons I have to set boundaries with people is because I value 6 different relationships in my life. And if I try to add that 7th one, which would be them, I will burn myself out. It will take energy that I can't afford to give. So if you think of those 6 little posts on a Lego block, you can think in terms of, I can probably handle 6 close friendships. Those 6 close friendships will take a lot of my time and energy to manage, especially if they're your children or your partner. So what you then understand is, I'm going to have a bunch of wonderful people in my life that I would love to have a closer relationship with, but I can't, because if I was to make room for them in my life, somebody who's on the existing 6 posts would have to get moved off of that. So one of my children might suffer if I start giving this other person all the time that friendship would require. So I'm not saying to that wonderful person, you're a bad person, that's why I'm not going to let you closer to me in my life. You're saying, you know what? I would love to have you in a closer relationship, but I'm a limited human being, so I can't. If I tried to, my kids would suffer, my wife would suffer. So I'm just going to have to keep you as a casual friend. That's the best we're ever going to be able to have because I have limitations. So that's a third purpose for why we set boundaries in our life. Now, what I want to focus on tonight is setting boundaries with people. So it takes a lot of courage to set a boundary, to say to somebody, you can't keep calling me, you can't keep texting me, no, I'm not going to give you a ride, no, I'm not going to give you $20. That's scary to have to do that. But you realize if I'm going to protect me, I have to say no and set some boundaries. It's not easy to say to mom and dad, I can't keep coming over every time you want. I can't sit and listen to you on the phone for an hour a day as you tear me down. It's scary to set a boundary, but it's even harder to enforce that boundary. Some people are great at making rules. It's enforcing the rules and the consequences if the person breaks the rules where they fail and where it all falls apart. So enforcing boundaries and setting boundaries, you have to have both. Both are difficult, but the enforcing is definitely the most difficult. So I want to begin with 3 situations that you're going to encounter in recovery where it is difficult to set and then enforce a boundary. The first is if you have a relationship with somebody who has a lot of needs and they become somewhat dependent on your help, and then you try to help them grow up. So think of it in terms of a child. So a child is totally dependent on you when they come into the world. And that's the way it has to be. You meet all their needs. And then you teach them. But you go, I don't want them to be still having me feed them with a spoon when they're 20 years old. I don't want to have a diaper on them when they're 15 years old. I don't want them to never do a thing to dress themselves when they're 15 years old. So if they are going to get healthy, they're going to go from total dependence on me to less and less dependence on me until they get to the age where they really don't need me very much at all. So that's the goal in parenting. And so when you are in a helper role in relationships and you're helping people who are very needy, very broken, they need to depend on you in the beginning. But you have to come to a point where you say, I have to start pushing them so they need me less. Pushing them so they can't depend on me as much. And that is difficult to do, especially if they've been dependent on you for advice about everything, to help them and encourage them in every situation they face. Now you're saying to them, you can think this through yourself. You've got the tools. You can go and confront that person. You don't need me to do it for you. You can think this through. You don't need me to help you process it. They don't like that. And there's several reasons why they resist you creating a boundary which makes them less dependent on you. The first is they can be afraid that if they don't have you, they might fail. And their fear of failure is what comes in and makes them want to hang on to you even more. Or when you start pushing them to greater independence, to them it feels like you're abandoning them. And that's a scary thing. And their fear of abandonment can kick in because a boundary feels like rejection. It feels like you're not saying, you're saying I'm doing something wrong, or you're going to walk away from me. And so that can kick in, and so you have to help them through that. But what they're going to do when they get that boundary is they're going to try to put pressure on you to go back to the way it used to be, to let them to continue to be needy. They're going to want to do that. And so they can try to manipulate you back to unhealthy boundaries. So if you're in a mentor position, if you are going to be a good mentor, you're going to let people be very close to you when they're in their greatest need, but you're going to push them to greater and greater independence, and they're not going to like that, but you're going to have to insist on it, and that's going to be difficult, and that's going to be scary, and that will be a challenge. But you're not going to be a good mentor unless you develop the ability to do that. There's a danger if you're in a helper position, but you haven't dealt with your shame and your codependency, is that you actually like people being dependent on you. It feeds your desire for people to look up to you and respect you and want you, and that seems to help your shame. And so you can, without even realizing it, create or foster dependence in relationships, where you want to keep people dependent on you, but you have to come to the point to realize that's not actually healthy for them. That's actually very selfish on my part. And so that's just something to be aware of. It's important to understand, too, that many people in recovery, often without realizing it, they are addicted to being needy. So they don't want somebody to push them out of that needy victim status to become responsible and more independent. They want the attention that comes when they're so needy and somebody comes in to rescue them and help them. And so they don't want to give that up. And so part of what they have to realize in recovery, if they want to get healthy, is they have to grow up. They have to be willing to become responsible people in recovery. But these can be very difficult people to deal with because they are constantly trying to draw you in to their crisis and their neediness because they don't want to get out of that victim mentality. There's a second time or a second occasion when you're going to have problems with setting and enforcing boundaries. In recovery, it's very easy to let people too close to you too soon. You let them into your bubble, into your inner circle too soon. And there's a bunch of reasons why that happens. The first reason is in recovery, there's a lot of needy, pushy people. And they're going to, as soon as you say hi to them and ask them a few questions and hang out with them a little bit, then they're going to start texting you 100 times a day, phoning you, wanting to spend every evening with you, and they're going to push and push. And if you're afraid to say no, and you're afraid to set boundaries, that's going to be difficult. But even with these people, if you set boundaries, they're going to try to push right past those boundaries. So recovery involves dealing with these kind of people because there's lots of them, and many of you have people flashing through your mind as I'm talking. The second thing that can happen in recovery is you see somebody that seems so nice, so helpful, you think, wow, this is a healthy person, but you get fooled. And you let them too soon into your life, and then one day you wake up and say, this is one sick puppy, this is a toxic person, how do I get rid of them now? And that happens a lot in recovery. Or a third thing that can happen is you're doing well in your recovery, and then somebody reaches out to you for help. And you think, I think I'm ready to give some help and to serve, and you check with some mentors, and they say, yeah, you're ready to help. So you begin to help them, and then you get what I just described. They now want to stay there. And you go, no, I need to make you more independent so you can grow up, and you try to push them out. And they go, no, I like this being dependent on you and you thinking for me and making decisions for me and doing stuff for me. It all started good. You were just helping a person with legitimate needs, but you got drawn in and then you didn't know how to push them back out. Or it can happen that we reach out for help to somebody else and they let us into their life, but in doing so, we're letting them close to us. And as we reach out for help, we get into this relationship where we talk a lot, spend a lot of time together, and then all of a sudden you go, okay, I'm through that crisis and I've grown from it. Now I don't need this person as much. And you try to pull away from them and they don't want to let you go. So you got a problem there. Another one that can happen in recovery is you have this deep longing to be loved. And you meet somebody and you just fall in love. And the feelings and the chemistry, they feel so right and they're so intense that you let this person in, or you go, okay, I got to go slow. But they start saying, oh, we're in love. Let's move in together. Let's do all kinds of stuff together. And you're afraid to say no because you don't want to lose them. So you let them in too close, and then you wake up and go, this is a jerk. And now what do I do to get rid of him? So here's a rule of thumb that I use in my life. It is easier to keep people at arm's length and gradually let them into my life than it is to let them in too soon and to try and push them back out to a healthy place. So if you can remember, keep people at arm's length first. Now that's not going to feel right because you're afraid they're not going to like you. You're afraid they're going to think you're cold and you're not friendly. And so there's all kinds of internal dynamics you're going to have to deal with when you keep people at arm's length. But it's better to do that and let them in slowly as you find out that they're good character people than it is to let them in too quickly and try to push them back out. There's a third type of area or people where it's going to be very difficult to set and enforce a boundary. And it's people that are already in your life biologically or friendships. And now you want to push that relationship out and set boundaries, and they don't like your new boundaries. So think of setting boundaries with your family. We have said that most people don't make it in recovery unless they learn to set boundaries with family. Most complex trauma families we saw last week, they live by boundaries, but they're all unhealthy boundaries. So there's unhealthy dynamics, unhealthy rules, unhealthy ways of relating to each other. So when you come into recovery, you go, I want to get healthier relationships with my family, so I have to set boundaries. So I'm not going to let them disrespect me. I'm not going to let them just pop in anytime they want. I'm not going to whatever. And you start setting boundaries with them, and they go, what are you saying, we're bad? They don't like your boundaries. And they're going to resist your boundaries. They're going to oppose your boundaries. And they're going to try to get you to go back to the way it used to be. And so you will start to get a pressure from them to go back to the old way. They could do all kinds of things, and we're going to look at that in just a minute. Or you could be in a relationship when you're into recovery. You were in a relationship in the problem, and now you're in recovery, and now you go, I got to get rid of this relationship. It's toxic. This person's not working on themselves. It is not healthy. And you try to get rid of them or move them out to just a casual friend, and they do not want to do that. They want to stay as a partner or an intimate relationship, and they'll put all kinds of pressure on you to get you to go back to the way it used to be. So how do you stop that? How do you enforce boundaries that are difficult to enforce? So there's two things, two skills that you need to be able to handle those kind of people that don't want to respect the boundaries that you set. Number one skill is you need to learn how to handle hooks. And what I mean by hooks is if you set out a boundary with let's say your family, and they want to hook you in so you go back to the old boundary. What are the kind of hooks that they will use to catch you like a fish and pull you back to the old boundary? So I want you to imagine a big toolbox. And in that toolbox, they've got 20 different lures that will work on different kinds of fish or on the same fish at different times of the day or different times of the year. Those are the hooks in their toolbox that they can use to catch fish and reel them in. So number one hook, and probably the most powerful, common one used, is guilt. So let's say you set a boundary with your mom or your mom and dad or your partner, and they say, after all we've done for you, this is how you're going to treat us. And you immediately go, oh yeah, I'm not being a very good son. I'm being very disrespectful. And you just cave. Or they say, do you realize how much you put us through when you were in the problem? And now you're going to push us out of your life? What kind of gratitude is that? Don't you appreciate the many sacrifices we made for you? And you just really go to guilt again and you cave. Or your dad says, you know what, you're really going to hurt your mom if you stick to this boundary. I don't even think your mom's going to be able to sleep very well if you do this. In fact, she hasn't slept well for 2 nights now, and it's all your fault. And you cave. Or your parents say, I thought you loved us. This isn't love. This is cruel. And you cave. So why does that boundary work? Do you realize, or that hook work? Do you realize that that hook would not work on a person who had no guilt and shame? They could try all those tricks, but that lure doesn't catch a fish that doesn't have any guilt or shame. It works because they play on the amount of shame you have in your life where you don't think you're very good, and the amount of guilt for all the stuff that you've done and put them through. So it only works because you haven't healed your stuff. So hooks don't work on people who are healthy, only on people who have the issues that connect to that fish lure. Another thing that they can do is to attempt to induce guilt by getting you to feel sorry for them. Your mom might say, I can't even eat these days. I'm just so worried about you. and so troubled by what you're doing in our relationship, and I can't sleep, and I worry all the time. And then you feel guilty. Or they might use a false accusation to create guilt. They might say, you think you're better than us now? You don't need us? Wow, you got a big ego. And they play on that. Or they say, you don't value your family, do you? We're just nothing to you. And that is a false accusation. All you think about is yourself. And they make you feel like you're a selfish, self-centered person. Those are all distortions. And they're playing on things that will create guilt by distorting stuff for you. Or they might use false, flawed logic to create guilt. They might take you back to something you've heard 1,000 times growing up. Families stay together no matter what. We always have each other's back. That's what families do, and you're breaking that. Shame on you for not valuing your family. Or you might have heard, you don't need people out there. All you need is family. So now when you're setting a boundary with family, they go, you don't need those people. You just need us. We'll help you in your recovery. That's all you need. And it seems to make sense. But it again is very distorted. So part of setting and enforcing boundaries and not responding to these hooks is you have to think through all the different games that they play to see if they're saying truth or if they're distorting truth and actually presenting a lie. And what you will find in all of these hooks is there's a lot of distortions and a lot of lies, but they feel like the truth because you've heard them all of your life. The next thing that they can do is they can manipulate you through crying, through lots of tears. So mom just starts bawling and you just feel terrible because mom's crying so much. Now here's what I want you to understand. So let's say mom and dad, they tried guilt. That doesn't seem to work on you today. And they go, no problem. Let's go to the next lure in our toolbox. Oh, tears and crying. Okay, let's try that. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, no problem. Let's go to our third lure in our toolbox. Let's get angry. And let's get in their face. And let's really tear a strip out of them. And let's threaten them. And let's even be disrespectful and say they're useless. They've always been a problem child. They've never appreciated anything. Let's intimidate them into giving in. And that works because most kids that have complex trauma are afraid of angry people. And so if somebody's getting angry, they just say, okay, I'll do what you want. Just don't get angry. And if they start threatening to not babysit anymore and not to give you any money or help you out anymore, then you get drawn in to going back to their boundary. But let's say you resist it. Then they go to the next tools in their toolbox. So the next one would be, let's just nag them a little bit. Let's ask them once a day if we can come over for a visit. And let's just wear them down so they finally just say, come over. I'm just tired of you nagging. Then they've won. Or they might triangulate. And that is, let's say you set a boundary with mom and dad, and all of a sudden you get a phone call tomorrow from your sister or your aunt saying, I heard about what you've done with mom and dad. How dare you? You're really a screw up. You're treating them so terribly. So now what they've done is they've brought other people in to put pressure on you. And if that doesn't work, they recruit even more people. And so now you got cousins and aunts and uncles calling you to say, what are you doing to your parents? What are you doing to this family? And that is a huge thing that many families do. But if that doesn't work, they go, still, no problem. We still got more lures in our toolbox. Let's bring out the next one. We'll start doing some manipulation games. We'll just give you the silent treatment. So we're not even going to talk to you. We're going to withhold our love. We're going to withhold money. We're going to withhold support. You can call, we're not answering the phone. Or if there's a social gathering, we're just going to pout every time we're around you. We're not going to give you a hug when you try to get a hug. We're going to punish you. And you're going to get so desperate to have us validate you and have us talk nicely to you again that you're going to say, okay, sorry, I'll do what you want. Please just be nice to me again. Okay, what happens if that doesn't work? Some families go to love bombing. And love bombing is all of a sudden you get a gift in the mail, something that you were desperately wanting but couldn't afford. And it's from mom and dad. Or you get mom and dad saying, you know what? You guys go out. We're going to treat you to the nicest restaurant in town and a movie, and we'll take care of the kids. Just have a wonderful time. What are they doing? They're getting you to the point where you go, how can I set a cruel boundary with people that are so nice to me? So they come at it from the other direction. If that doesn't work, now you can see that you're starting to get tired of all of these different manipulation tactics, but they still got a few to go. So if that doesn't work, they can create a crisis. So dad can phone you and say, you got to come over. Mom's just beside herself, and I don't know what to do with her. You're the only one that can help her. Please come over. And you rush over to help mom out, and you get drawn back in because they created a crisis. And all kinds of things can do that. Now, I want to stop and say this. Do you realize that your kids can do all these things as well? Your kids can play on your guilt. Your kids can pout. Your kids can try to punish you. Your kids can play all kinds of games, love bomb you, create crisis. And those you have to be aware of as a parent, because if you're not, you get drawn into their games and your kids end up with unhealthy boundaries. Okay, back to the list. One thing that can happen, especially when you get into a relationship with somebody, is they study you to find out your weaknesses. But more than that, they study you to find out what were the needs or longings in you that were never met as a child, but that you have a deep desire still, that you still want those needs and longings met. So let's say they've studied you and they find out you have this deep longing for validation. So what do every time you put a boundary up with them? They validate you. They say, you're so good at what you do. And they get you to the point where you think, wow, I like this person is so great. And you give in to what they want. So they study you in order to figure out how to manipulate you. Another common trick, let's say that you break up with somebody, or let's say you say to mom and dad, can only see you once a week. They might come back and propose a compromise. So let's say you break up with somebody who's abusive or toxic, and they say, can't we at least be friends? Maybe we could go out for coffee once a week, or would it be still okay if I texted you regularly? And you say, sure, yeah, we'll go for coffee once a week. Or you can text me a couple times a day, and guess what the person is thinking? Great, it's still on. I can reel them back in because they accepted the compromise. They're not going with what their boundary was, and I can manipulate them back to the other boundary. All common tools. Now there's one other tool. And it's not one that's done in the instant moment. It's one that is carried out over a long period of time. And it's a person who, when you get in a relationship with them, they have to be superior. But what they want to do is wear you down so your self-worth or your self-esteem gets lower and lower and lower. Because as it gets lower, you feel worse about yourself. You don't trust your own thinking. You don't trust your own perception of things. So you give that person more and more power to think for you, to feel for you, to tell you reality. They make you a zero, and they are 100% in control of everything of you. When that happens, then they can manipulate you out of any boundary that you try to set. And the more they do that, the less backbone you have when it comes to sticking to or enforcing a boundary. You don't have the courage or the strength to fight for yourself, to stand up for yourself, to set and enforce a boundary. So the first skill with people who don't respect your boundaries is learn to manage the hooks. Don't get drawn into their hook, because that will change your boundary back to the old one. Now there's a second skill, and it's kind of tied in with some of what we just said. But it's when you first get to know a person, be aware of the red flags. So everybody we meet starts as an acquaintance. We know, hi, what's your name? I know a little bit about you. Then we let them into a casual friend where we talk a little bit more about a little broader subject matter. And then if we like them, we let them into a close friend. And then if we really like them, we let them into a soulmate. The danger with complex trauma is we meet people and we like them and we let them in as a soulmate right away. Then we find out they're toxic and we try to get rid of them. So the correct way to go about building relationships and protecting yourself is when you meet everybody as an acquaintance, pay attention to the gut feeling, to your gut as to sensing something doesn't feel safe with this person. Something doesn't feel right. Pay attention to that, because you're usually right. And if you were to let that person in, it could do a lot of damage to you. Now, here's why this is important. When you meet people as an acquaintance, they don't show you their dark side. They look perfect, but your gut picks up what they're not showing you, what's behind the mask. And that's the real them. So when you meet people, pay attention to your gut. And if you get all kinds of red flags, keep them as an acquaintance. Don't let them even get to a casual friend. But let's say they have the odd little bit of a red flag, nothing that's super serious, so you let them into a casual friend. But you say, I'm not going to let them any closer, because there's things there that if I let them closer, I will get hurt and it will do a lot of damage. So pay attention to the red flags. It is important to understand that for people in early recovery, pay a special attention to red flags. We all hate the lonely feelings of early recovery. We all want to be loved, but don't let people in too quick where you've ignored the red flags, because they will destroy your recovery and often lead to a relapse. So let me give you one final thing. A helpful tool in setting boundaries with people that you know might be difficult, or preparing yourself to set boundaries or stick to boundaries in situations where you get blindsided. And what I mean by blindsiding is this. A lot of situations in life we can plan for. So Christmas is coming up. Okay, this is what usually happens in the family. I can prepare boundaries for that. But there's other things where you're walking downtown and you run into your old drug dealer. Are you prepared for setting a boundary right away when he says, can I hook you up with anything? So what this is trying to prepare yourself through mental visualization of situations that you're going to potentially encounter in recovery that could mess you up badly if you're not prepared for it. So we talked about, what would you say if you're walking downtown tomorrow and you do run into your dealer and they say, can I hook you up? Are you ready? With a response to them that says, no, I'm not in that anymore, and you walk away. Or what happens if you're walking downtown and you run into an old user buddy and they go, hey, I just got some stuff. Come on, let's go. Are you ready for what you're going to say? Or you're walking downtown and you see some tinfoil or some paraphernalia on the sidewalk. Do you have a plan where you're ready for that? Or let's say you've been in the sex trade and you go to a 12-step meeting or even come to Finding Freedom, and one of your old Johns comes up and slips you a paper with their phone number on. Are you ready for those situations? That's an important thing in learning to set boundaries. Another one, you could get a text today from an ex or from a dealer or from a using buddy. Are you prepared for what you're going to say if you get a text or if they call you? Are you prepared for that? And then let's say you go to a family gathering and they say we're going to keep it nice and clean. There's not going to be any booze, and then somebody shows up with booze. What are you going to do if that happens? Or let's say you start a new job and you're on the new job and you want everybody to like you and somebody starts flirting with you. Are you prepared to say no to that person and push them away? You have to be prepared for that. Let's say your ex relapses and you say it's done and they go, oh, but only you know me and understand me and only you can help me. Are you prepared for a response for that? Or mom says, you know what, you're setting boundaries with me. What happens if I die tomorrow? You're going to have regrets. Are you prepared in your mind for all of that? And if mom phones you and she starts tearing you down, are you prepared to say, Mom, if you keep talking, I'm going to hang up? So be prepared as best you can for all the different kinds of difficult situations that you will encounter in your recovery. So that's the end of part 1. Okay, for the Christian part, there's this story in the Bible that is such a beautiful illustration of boundaries, but most people have never seen it in the story. And it's the story of Joseph. So if you haven't been here, we've talked about Joseph before. Joseph was that kid, if you went to Sunday school, who had the coat of many colors. And that coat just meant he was the favored child. He had 11 other brothers. They had to work. He didn't have to work. So he was this privileged, spoiled kid. And the other brothers, his 10 older brothers, hated him. And one day when Dad wasn't around and they had Joseph all by themselves, they said, we got to get rid of this guy. We hate him. And they had so much anger and resentment towards Joseph that they captured him, stripped his coat off of him, threw him in a pit. And then when some traders who were passing by, heading to Egypt, came along, they sold Joseph to them. And Joseph went to Egypt as a slave. So Joseph's life went from being this spoiled, easy, affluent life to a life of mistreatment, abuse, and slavery. In Egypt, we spend a whole bunch of years, about 13 years, where Joseph just went through ups and downs. As a slave, he got brought into a family. They liked him, gave him more responsibility. Then the wife of the master, she accused him of rape, and he was thrown into prison. He didn't commit rape, false accusation, but he was put in jail. Nobody questioned it. Then in jail, mistreated, but then the prison keeper, kind of like Joseph, gave him responsibilities, and there's an opportunity for him to get out, and the person who was going to get him out forgot all about him, and he had to stay there for 2 more years in jail. It was a hard, painful time. And it would have been really, really easy in that time to develop a massive hate and resentment towards his 10 older brothers. But in that time, Joseph, we're going to find out, forgave his brothers. Now, after he'd been in jail for that period of time, one day, the Pharaoh of Egypt had a dream that troubled him. And one of his right-hand man was one of the guys who was in prison. And he says, I remember there's this kid in prison who could interpret dreams, and Joseph is brought, and he interprets Pharaoh's dream, and he says to Pharaoh, there's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And he said, Pharaoh, if you don't mind me making a suggestion, I would suggest that during those 7 years of plenty, you tax the farmers 20% of their crops, make huge grain elevators all over the land, put all of the grain into those elevators, and then in the 7 years of famine, we'll have enough food to feed all of Egypt. And Pharaoh said, that is a brilliant idea. I'm going to make you my right-hand man, and I'm going to make you responsible for all of that taxing and the grain elevators and the harvest. And then once the 7 years of famine come, that you'll make sure everybody gets fed. And so that became Joseph's role. He went from being in a prison to exalted to the second most powerful man in all of Egypt and in all of the world. Now that famine did come. So 21 years after Joseph had been shipped off by his brothers were going through the same famine, and they hear that there's bread, there's grain in Egypt, and they go down to Egypt, and Joseph is the one that meets with everybody to make sure they get their food. And one day he comes out to meet the next bunch, and there's 10 brothers all bow down before him. Now what you have to understand is they don't recognize Joseph. It's been 21 years. He's grown a lot. He now looks and is dressed like an Egyptian. So they bow down and just think they're before some great big Egyptian hotshot that they have to ask for grain. So here's what's going on inside of Joseph. He's already forgiven them. He would like to have a relationship with them. And if he's going to have a relationship with them, he has to reveal that who he really is. He's got to reveal his identity. He's got to say, I'm Joseph. But here's what's going on. I don't want a relationship with them unless they've truly changed. Are they sorry for what they did to me? Are they sorry for the grief they caused my father when they told him that his special son had died? They didn't care about what they put their dad through. They didn't care about what they put me through. Have they changed? So over this 21 years, Joseph's been thinking through a plan to find out if they've truly changed. And so what he's decided to do is he's going to try and recreate the events of 21 years ago to see if they will respond differently. Only this time it's not going to be, how are you going to treat me? It's going to be, how are you going to treat Benjamin? So Jacob the father had a favorite wife, Rachel. And Joseph was the firstborn son of his favorite wife. That's why Joseph was the favored son. With Joseph gone, Benjamin's become the favorite son. And so Joseph is thinking, I'm going to find out how they're going to treat Benjamin. Now the problem is Benjamin wasn't there, just the 10 older brothers. So he has to find out a few things. So in his first encounter, here's what he does. How do you, if you're in a position of authority, get people to start talking about a lot of stuff? You get really angry, gruff, and you accuse them of being spies. So Joseph says, you're not here for grain. You're here from a foreign country to check out where our weaknesses are. You're spies. So what do? No, we're not spies. No, we have one man up in Israel. His name's Jacob, and we got a younger brother that's still there. And they just start giving as much information as they can to prove that they're good people. They're not spies. And Joseph is sitting there going, so dad's still alive. Good. Benjamin's still alive. And he's up there with dad. That means he's probably the favored child. Okay, so he says, I'm not going to believe what you're saying unless you prove it. So you say you're honest men, and you've told me all of this stuff about your dad and your younger brother. Okay, here's how we're going to test if you're honest men. bring this so-called brother back the next time you come. Then I'll know that you're not lying to me. So he set it up so that they're going to bring Benjamin the next time. And he says, don't bother coming back for more food unless you bring that little brother you say you have. Okay, now let me just stop and say this. The 10 brothers don't know that it's Joseph, and so they don't know that Joseph can understand their language. So they start talking, and they're panicking because they know that Dad doesn't want to get rid of Benjamin. He's been overprotective of Benjamin after what Joseph went through. And so they start whispering amongst themselves, and they say, God is judging us for what we put Joseph through 21 years ago. And Joseph's listening. And what he's listening for is this. They're seeing that God is involved in forcing them to deal with the wrong they did 21 years ago. Their conscience is getting stirred up. So they go away. But what Joseph does is he puts their money back in the top of their grain sacks. So he has his servants fill all their grain sacks up. He puts the money back. So they're going to go back to Egypt and open their bags and see all their money. And they're going to go, oh no, we told him we're honest men. Now he's got proof that we were not honest men. It's like we stole our money back. And they're panicking. And so they go to their father and they say, we had a terrible experience. We got the grain, but he accused us of being spies. And he says the only way that we can prove that we're not spies, and the only way we're ever going to get more food is we got to take Benjamin back. And now we got all this money. He's going to really think we're bad people. We're never going to get food again. And Jacob was so angry, and he resisted even when the food was starting to run out. He resisted them going back to Egypt for more food until they got to a point where they said, we don't have an option. We're going to starve to death. We have to take the risk. So Jacob said, take all your money. In fact, take double your money. Take extra gifts and take Benjamin. And if he dies, he dies. And they go back. Now, the second encounter is fascinating. The men come in, and Joseph tells his servant, take these men into this room. And the 10 brothers and Benjamin don't have a clue what's going on. And they get ushered into this room, and there's a big dining hall. And then they're standing there not knowing what to do. And Joseph comes in, and he says, and he seats them in order of their age. And they're going, how does he know that this is the oldest, and this is the second oldest, and the third oldest? And what he's trying to do is give them the sense that he's got special powers of knowing stuff. So now they're even more convinced they can't lie and that they've been found out for that stuff they did 21 years ago that they thought they kept a secret. And so they're all seated. And then as there's food is served, everybody gets a serving of food, but Benjamin gets 5 times as much. And so what he's doing is spoiling Benjamin, treating him with special favor, just like little Joseph was treated by Daddy many years ago. After the meal, they all get their grain. And then in Benjamin's sack, Joseph puts his special silver cup. And it was believed that that cup gave him special powers. And that goes into Benjamin's sack. So none of the brothers know what's going on here. He puts all their money back as well. And then they head back to Israel. They just get going down the road, and Benjamin sends some soldiers after them. Joseph sends some soldiers after them. And he says, one of you has stolen my silver cup, my special power cup. No, we wouldn't. And he brings them all back to the palace. And Joseph gives them a talking to. And he says, somebody's stolen my cup. It was here at the meal. I drank from it, and it's gone. And the brothers say, if you find that cup, you can kill the person who has it. So they start at the oldest person's, open the bag, no cup. Second one, open the bag, no cup. They get around to the 10th, still no cup, and they go, good, we're out of this. And then they open Benjamin's bag, and there's the cup. And they go, we just told Joseph that he could kill Benjamin. But what would that do to Dad? So Joseph has recreated the scenario from 21 years ago where they took young Joseph and told Dad that he was dead. And what Joseph is saying is, okay, here's Benjamin now that has the same place in Dad's heart. Are you willing to let me kill him and put Dad through it again? Are you sorry for what you did that 21 years ago? And he's testing them. And so what happens at that point is the brothers break down. And the one brother stands up, Judah, and he says, Sir, we cannot kill Benjamin because it would kill our father. And we can't put our dad through that. Please kill me instead of Benjamin. And what Joseph sees is that they're finally truly sorry for what they did to him 21 years ago and what they did to their dad. And so Joseph at that point goes, now I can take down the boundary and reveal my identity and restore the relationship with them. So this is so important. I want you to understand, Joseph had forgiven them all along, but he still was saying there's going to be a boundary. Even though I've forgiven you, I don't trust you. I don't let you into my life. You're going to have to prove yourself before there's any restoration of a relationship. And so in order for that to happen, you have to be sorry for what you did to me. You got to be sorry for what you did to your dad. And you have to have a huge attitude change. And that will be displayed in how you treat Benjamin, because he was treated just like me by my dad. Have you changed? Because if you haven't changed, yes, I've forgiven you, but you're not going to be in my life. And so it is okay to have people that you've forgiven in recovery, but you don't let them into your life. And you're not going to remove that boundary until you have proof that they have actually changed. And that is perfectly okay. And that is what Joseph beautifully models for us. So, it is important to develop discernment in this, because a lot of people will say, I'm sorry, but they haven't really changed. So you're not just listening to their words, I'm sorry, you're watching for evidence that they've really changed. Another way to look at all of this, I can only have a close, intimate relationship with somebody whose heart has changed and has become more healthy. The healthier the two lives, the closer and healthier the intimacy. So if I'm growing and the other person isn't, and they're not changing or seeing their need, I need a boundary. If they are changing, I can let them come closer to me and we can have a healthier relationship. So I hope that beautiful story gives you some permission to set and enforce boundaries and some guidelines to when you start to let those people in again. Let's pray. Father, I'm just so grateful for this story. It is such a beautiful, beautiful story. And it gives so much practical advice and guidelines to us in relationships, especially around boundaries with people who have hurt us in the past. And I just pray that you would meet each person where they're at and just give them the guidance and advice they need in their life right now. Amen. That is our evening. Thank you for coming. Have a great weekend.